First of all, for those joining, Dylan Southern, part of a directors duo 32, and the other half will join us eventually. We're gonna go sort of between the way we did in the camera assistant talk, just to give both of them some space. Do you feel you've made it?
I don't think, no. I don't think that's something that I would think.
Say.
I've made it. I'm kind of a big deal.
Yeah.
No, I don't think you ever can. And I think as soon as you think that, then it's a bit of a dick, aren't you? It's like you're a bit, like you see it a lot with directors that kind of like get a bit of success and it kind of changes them as people, and like or maybe it changes how they're perceived, or it, I just think you can never stop learning. You can never stop like getting better. I'm a huge self-critic, and I'd like, I was looking through some old notebooks a while back that were full of ideas that I'd written sort of 10 years ago, and just like gone, oh, that's shit, and kind of pushed them aside. And then I was looking at them. Some of them have been done by other people since. Some of them are like, oh, that's actually quite good. Why did I think that was shit? And it's just, so there's that side of it. You can be too much of a self-critic to the point where you stop being productive, which I think I suffer from sometimes, but I do think you have to be enough of a self-critic that you're never happy. Because that's what's going to make you
grow,
want to do better things.
Yeah. Do you feel there was this kind of point, that typical curve that you think you're amazing and then you realize you're kind of not, and then you grow? Did you feel there's like this fake self-confidence to start with, or you always sort of were quite cautious as a duo about your successes? And because you relatively, to put it mildly, we chatted about it, but the awards, you've done where the industry says you're good. There's still something nagging inside that?
Only that you can always be better. So, but I think, isn't there something nagging inside everyone that you kind of?
I think there is, but what interests me as well is that sort of perceived success and perceived lack of self-doubt on Instagram, because obviously that has shifted, and correct me if I'm wrong, it has shifted the commercial industry quite a lot in terms of how people are hired or how they perceived and what's their style.
I mean, it took us ages to get an Instagram account.
You only joined recently.
Yeah, I think just over a year ago.
Did you feel you had to, basically? It was like you can't not join anymore?
Well, yeah, I guess so. It feels like there is a need for that. I sort of find it uncomfortable, self-promotion, and like, so kind of ended up just putting, I don't know, like, it's a difficult one because you can see how it's necessary, and like people promote themselves and like, but I find the constant sort of need for validation and like looking at, you see who's been looking at stuff, like it's just, I don't think it's healthy. I don't think it's but that's not an original kind of opinion, but it's
it probably is not healthy. But also I always feel that it's also kind of doesn't help with avoiding pigeonholing, that in a way some directors have shaped even their visual, because suddenly directors are judged on their visuals all of a sudden, where before it was more people actually watched full 30-second thing, where now people judge how good was your commercial by a bunch of stills pulled by DP or pulled by production company or pulled by colorists, and then you're like, this is good, and then you watch it and you're like, interesting choice of stills. It makes it like a pretty different commercial to what it actually is. Not even talking about quality, but it's like emotion suddenly is fucking far away. There's like emotion is not, doesn't bother. What's your division? Do you have sort of set roles?
I mean, a lot of on-set stuff is just, I mean, as you know yourself, because you work with us, is kind of shared equally. I would say that I'd probably write a bit more or kind of generate ideas through writing a bit more than Will, and Will's kind of, he's good at kind of client facing stuff.
The politics of it.
Yeah, he's very, very good at handling people in a way that I'm sometimes not.
How, in terms of timeline, we had this kind of quick pre-call. So you mentioned you're roughly at Pulse, you're for about 13 years, and you're working for about 15. Is that correct?
Yeah, I'd say so, yeah.
Is there a link between how happy you are with the final piece versus the budget of the piece?
No, I'm most happiest with the things that have cost the least to make, and where we've had to kind of innovate or to do, to make a little bit of money go further.
Mm-hmm.
But if anyone's watching who chooses directors for jobs, I also really like big budget jobs,
big checks
with lots of shooting days. I think if it's a big brand and they have money to spend, they should spend money. But I think when it's kind of like a charity job, or it's often we'll do stuff for BBC where you can't be spending loads of the license payers' money, so you accept that those jobs are as kind of smaller budget, and you kind of like you get to kind of I don't know, flex a bit more than you would if you have the luxury of having money for everything, I kind of, and for me, like, I'm just a big fan of the process. My favorite thing is like shooting, making stuff. So whenever you get down to a smaller crew and you get down to kind of just making the thing, that's when it's fun for me.
Regards the sort of versatility and variety of stuff you've done, guys, because you go from full-blown sort of music docs observational, which is sort of the Blur film, the live sort of performance, which is more the shut up and play the hits, which is kind of mixed with observational, and then full-on music videos and full-on commercials. Did it when you were starting?
And we've done animation as well.
Sorry, and you've done animation as well.
And corporate videos, a lot of corporate videos.
Corporate as well. What a wedding? Have you done a wedding?
Never done a wedding.
Were you kind of consciously avoiding being pigeonholed?
When we came to London, we had no concept of that the business existed, that it kind of worked a certain way, that you needed to kind of like find a niche. And we also happened to join a company that was growing at the same time. So in a weird way, it's not like we had our thing. We weren't like the guys that shoot this or that or the other. Like we was kind of loved trying everything. Unfortunately, advertising is an industry that kind of puts you in a box. And I think we did an advert very early on that was kind of emotional storytelling, and I think for a long time we were kind of in that box, which we like to do. Is if it's a good script, but they're few and far between. A lot of the time it's kind of like forced emotion, and like that's not something that my least favorite feeling is when you're kind of looking at the monitor and it's not working because it isn't an honest idea. I think
on the stage of writing it has failed sort of already.
Yeah, perhaps. So it's just like you can't attach that emotion to that product, or you can't. It's kind of difficult ground advertising. You kind of have to, if you're tugging at people's heartstrings.
Yeah, I understand. You have to be kind of sincere, or it fails pretty much.
You have to earn it. And you can see that in ads that don't work and ads that do. So, but the downside of being in that particular box is like we very rarely get an opportunity to do anything that's a kind of big art directed job, or that's got comedy in it, or we never had an intention of like having a multifaceted career, but it does kind of work in our favor, because then we can sometimes push towards jobs that perhaps people might not think of for us, because we can say, well, we've done this or that.
Because that, even at your level, it still sort of works the same way, right? You meant to have done something similar, especially in commercial world, right?
Yeah.
So I watched your latest, like the recent BBC piece, right? Shot in Isolation. Is that, because I think you guys are masters of emotional editing, is the formula to a tear jerk kind of moment? I watched it, I was like, fucking hell, how do they do it? Why am I kind of welling up?
Do you know what? That's a good question for Will.
Okay, ready.
One day, I will tell you there are no new cases.
And I'll read that the Nightingale is closing down.
We'll take time to reflect and remember those lives lost.
And we'll hug our loved ones.
Our kids will play with their friends and finally go back to school.
We will see our colleagues again.
Sport will return, whether you like it or not.
Cafes, shops and cinemas will open their doors.
One day, plans will be made and kept.
And until then, we'll be here to help you understand what's happening every step of the way.
So, Will, I'm going to ask you that question that Dylan passed to you. If there is a tear-jerk formula in the edit.
No.
Great. But how do you do it then? What's your...
Well, it was a script, you know, it was a lovely script, and...
You think that's it? Just
well,
a script?
No,
Isn't that a
but...
combination even of shots from a kid to a group to all of that? Is it something you have to feel?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, specifically the BBC one we just did was, obviously it was like, part of it, I guess, is the time right now and the kind of, feeling people have right now about the world. Mm-hmm. But there's not a formula. It was certainly not a formula that we kind of think about,
But then you find it's usually in the edit, or you kind of in the even previs or storyboard level, you can sort of start feeling it, or is it only really clicks when you've shot it?
Well, I think it depends what the ad is, what the film is. Like the one we just did, you knew kind of exactly what you were filming to a certain degree, and often the best bits are the kind of stuff you hadn't planned anyway. So when you're shooting, something happens, and that's the kind of bit that feels the most real. And people, and that when you're filming that stuff, that's everyone knows that's like the kind of the magic,
Yeah, because even in the big one, like in the Shut Up and Play the Hits, even, there's obviously the band, but there's also the crying guy or whatever the name, that little kind of episode of someone crying continuously throughout the film. So, and is that something you noticed while shooting, for example, taking that, or that's sort of found you looking for these moments in the edit?
I can't really remember because we shot that film live, like we weren't monitoring. We weren't monitoring the cameras. Everyone had a brief. Dylan was operating a camera, and so I mean I've talked to you about that before. But everyone had a brief, and we so we weren't, there wasn't like a bank of monitors, and we were looking at it. So I think specifically with that kid. But then when you're in the edit and you see it straight away, and you realise like well, there you go, Dylan and Spike's cameras were they both spotted this guy and were filming it. I can't remember where I was. Probably running around panicking somewhere, but yeah, I think like in the edit, and certainly like anyone who was there, and you realised it was a big moment.
I want to ask you about the relationship with Pulse, the company you signed with. So you getting signed 13 years ago. So Pulse is just beginning, basically. It's you're one of the first, I think, to be signed, if I'm correct.
Yeah, I mean we were my brother, one of my brothers' director was there. Yeah. And I think there was probably 4, 5, 6 other directors there at that time. They'd been going for like a year or two.
Proper beginning.
And yeah, I mean, it was in like 2 or 3 or 4 offices ago. It was like one room or one or 2 rooms above a record shop in Soho. So it was like it was a small company. And to be honest, we didn't even know what getting signed meant. It was like, we didn't know any of that stuff really.
Do you think the directors, up-and-coming directors and young directors these days get sort of really stuck into this idea of getting signed, that now everyone knows what getting signed is? That's everyone's what they're striving towards, to be at certain cool companies.
I guess. I mean, I suppose.
How did it change for you, for example? What's the role of Pulse throughout the years in your careers?
Well, I mean, when we first started, when we joined Pulse, I guess we had been like making music videos with our friends, and we suddenly started kind of pitching on videos properly. So it was a bit more pro for sure than we'd been used to. But then I guess now the fact that like there's this sort of stuff, it would be a weird thing now, I imagine, for you to be like the sort of age we were and not really understand the way it worked, because it's so much easier to find out how it works than it was when certainly when we started. You know, like when we joined Pulse, we didn't think about making commercials. I didn't even really think people made commercials. I hadn't thought about it, and that wasn't on the radar at all. You know.
What was your goal? Like, what was the dream? So you moved to London from Liverpool, right? Am I correct? You both from Liverpool.
From Liverpool.
What's the dream? Like, what's the plan?
Well, I guess to make films. You know, that was always the dream. It's like everyone. But then we sort of came to London and carried on doing what we were doing, making stuff, and joined Pulse pretty early on, and kind of started making up stuff with them as well. You know, it's like there wasn't like a kind of grand plan at all. And I guess because it was a young company, we were at the same sort of stage as each other, and so like no one was like, cool, well this is how it's done. Let's do, you know, here's the route you need to follow. It was like we sort of figured it out together, you know.
Can you talk about the role, keeping in mind, for example, for young filmmakers who kind of starting their careers maybe in commercials, what's the role of producer? Because obviously Pulse is the people who would not supply, but they have, you know, producers, both freelance and on the books. What's the role of that person in your average, say, commercial or film, if you're doing a doc?
Producer in a commercial and a producer in a music documentary like we're working on at the moment, that's very different, because one of them is more like on a longer form project, they're helping like creatively make the film. We're on a commercial, they are as well, but there's also a lot on a commercial. There's a lot of their time gets spent speaking to the agency, kind of figure out
being that sort of filter, that shield between you and everyone else to some extent, right?
Maybe like I think it's more I guess on a commercial it's quite the certain meetings you have to do and certain ways you have to do things, and then within that then you kind of figure out how to do what you want to do, you know. But yeah, I mean, super important, like, and like, we've been really lucky to have like over the years quite often one producer for like 4 or 5 years, and that's the only person we work with, and then another, and then do that again, but then sometimes you have a variety of different people, and that's fun and it's all good.
Does it get easier as you get sort of more experienced and older directing?
No, I think on commercials, I think there's a whole bunch of stuff at the beginning that you don't know in terms of the process, and that once you've done it a few times, then I remember doing the first commercial we did, and someone said, it's PPM day. And I was like, I don't know what PPM is, like pre-production meeting. That I literally didn't know what that was. And so like that kind of stuff, which is a big deal, you know, if you hadn't done it before, then you don't know what it is. And once you've done it a bunch of times, then that's part of it becomes like not easier, but you know what you're doing, you know.
And what's the stuff that doesn't get easier? What's the stuff that sort of is still...
Just making good stuff, that's hard, you know. Like it's in commercials, certainly it's like there's a lot of things that have to come together for it to be really good, you know. It's got to be a brilliant idea, and then you have to do your job and kind of try and bring that to life, and like get the right cast, and like there's a whole bunch of stuff that could go wrong at any moment, and you have to sort of navigate that. Anything can go wrong when you're shooting.
Does it feel different in commercial world, the UK market versus US market?
Well, we shoot a lot more over here than we do over in the States.
Oh, do you?
Yeah, but I mean, yeah, they're very different for sure. Like it's way faster in America, definitely.
Faster.
Like, with the whole thing, like you get told about told about a job, and you're shooting it way quicker than you are over here, definitely. And I guess because we don't live in the States, you do a lot of this kind. We're not facing, like, often it's just conference calls and stuff. Probably more so than you do in London, where you're gonna, you know, go and have meetings with people and actually do it for real. But yeah, it's quicker for sure over there.
Directing comedy special for Aziz and Netflix.
Yeah.
What does it involve? Like, what does it mean directing a comedy special?
So Aziz came to us after Shut Up and Play the Hits because he was there that night, and I think he liked how the film turned out, and he asked us if he wanted to do his comedy special. And it was, obviously it wasn't through Pulse, but it came with the company that he always worked with, and all they did was make comedy specials, and we wanted to make it in a slightly different way. You know, they wanted kind of standard studio cameras and all the normal angles, and you know, in an ideal world we would have shot it on film, and we wanted a lot of handheld, and we wanted to shoot it in a way that people don't usually shoot comedy specials, and we had to compromise. We shot on Alexas in the end, and we had, you know, a team of really great DPs the same way we did it on Shut Up and Play the Hits. Reed Morano flew in just to do it for, you know, old time's sake. But then when it came to the edit, it was frustrating. It was like doing an American commercial. It was out of our hands. The shots that we would have used, which were the more unusual, weren't used in the edit. Yeah, it was just quite frustrating, really. They just went with the sort of the grammar that has been established and used over and over again and refined, which is, you know, wide for the setup, close for the punchline, and we kind of were being a bit more nuanced than that. And it was even more frustrating seeing the last one that he did, which was shot on 16mm handheld, and it was kind of the aesthetic that would have been ours if we had chosen it. So sort of kind of a little ambivalent over that. Like, it was a really
But was it his decision? So was it production company's decision?
There was a production company involved who, you know, we didn't even want to have a live mixing desk. You know, we wanted just to shoot it because, you know, the way we did Shut Up and Play the Hits was kind of inspired by, you know, sort of D.A. Pennebakers and, you know, the Maysles brothers and stuff. Like, the instructions to all the DPs was go out and film your experience of the night. So if something, if you're filming the band on stage, but something interests you over here, just go with it. We'll kind of find a way to make it work in the edit. And, you know, it was a very deliberate choice to hire DPs rather than camera ops, so that each one had an eye and would be finding stuff that made it more than just a concert film, that made it like being there. So we tried to kind of transpose that ethos over to doing a live, you know, a live comedy show. And the people we worked with weren't used to working in that way, and they thought that we were a bit naive, and we weren't used to working in a kind of, you know, very traditional, like you have your monitors out back. And, you know, I was operating a camera, Will was actually directing, and he had Scott Rudin sat behind him the whole time. So it was just like, because we didn't want to do a live mix on the night. We didn't want to be calling cameras and like they go away with the tape virtually as their offline edit, and then, you know, refine it when they're doing online edit. We wanted to treat it like a, you know, and there is an important thing in terms of the language of those things, that you do need to like land
on the punchline.
You need to, yeah, you need to like make this, you know, like when you're telling a story, you need to make sure that like you've set it up correctly, and then like you hit people with the punchline. I think you have to do that with the visual language of a comedy show, but I think there's more than one way to do it.
How do you sell these sort of groundbreaking new ideas or attitudes to someone who controls the bank?
We did it.
Way to do, you didn't. but for Shut Up and Play the Hits, that sort of makes the film.
Kind of necessity is the mother of invention, and like shooting in Madison Square Garden is incredibly expensive because it's unionized. It was a massive hack that really pissed off the unions, that we were kind of able to shoot without like using all the infrastructure, because all the cameras were going to be handheld. There were going to be no cables for a live mix. We ruled out a crane straight away, because there's nothing more cheesy than a kind of crane shot sweeping across the crowd. It's, you know, it removes you from that sense of being there. I'm done on that answer.
Is there a lot of politics when making a music doc? Or do they sort of, if they trust you, they leave you be?
It's like making anything about real people. Like, would you want to just trust two people you'd never met to tell the story of your life, Edgar?
No, like I mean, this interview alone is like nerve-wracking.
I think there's a certain amount of circling each other before you fully trust. With James, we met him a couple of times in London and New York, and the film that we were originally going to make was very different. It was going to be a fictionalized day in the life of James Murphy, and he was going to kind of when he got into taxis, in the taxi would be someone he knew. It's kind of like 20,000 Days on Earth, which was the next film that Pulse made after, but that was a complete coincidence.
You hired to make a biopic piece about them to some extent.
Both occasions we went to the artists. They hadn't put out that they wanted to make anything.
I see.
We went to them and said, well, we're these guys, like, this is the idea for the film we have. Or in the case of James, we kind of co-developed it. Like we worked our way around what each other's taste was.
Is there ever a strange balance of power that you work on this for months, you are the directors on it, but still there's a sort of force that can shift the edit massively if they ever want to? Is there ever that fear on the back of your mind?
There is, and on both of those films, we didn't. There was a certain component of record label money on the Blur one, and there was, I think the one thing is we don't want to come in and like upset anybody and make a film that they wouldn't want to. So we're careful in the edit anyway, and we try to make it as collaborative as possible.
Do you need to like the band to make a good doc about them?
No. I think if you like them too much, then you're not going to make a good doc.
Because Blur was, being with people on the road, right? You were with them for a bit of time. Is there a certain thing you learned about filmmaking aspect of something like that, a music doc, while shooting that piece?
It was a shoot of two halves. I remember we didn't want to have interviews in it. We wanted to just do like, a Maysles brothers direct cinema type thing of like where we just filmed and then we cut it together, like a very kind of Frederick Wiseman or Maysles brothers kind of approach. But it became clear that that wouldn't work. But one of the things we did is we decided not to try and ingratiate ourselves with them or make friends with them and just hang back and film. And I think it got us loads of really good footage because we made ourselves invisible. But then when it came to do the second part, that was all in the rehearsal rooms. When it came to do the second part, which was to go on tour with them, which was to do interviews, there was perhaps not the relationship there that was needed to, so that was, I don't know if I would ever do it any differently, because I think the film we got worked. Shooting in a way where you're getting stuff that's as close to what would have happened if you weren't there, I prefer. But it depends on the story you're telling. It depends on the LCD one. And it was kind of, we had to shoot this huge event. We had to kind of wrangle, I think we had 12 DPs. We had to time everything to the show to make sure people were in the right places at the right time for things that we had to get. And then we were also kind of threading a story through that.
I always thought, did you actually shoot the next morning? Like that bedroom and all of that stuff? Is it truly the day after?
Did it seem like it was?
It always had a strange quality. I watched that film a bunch of times. I always found that one scene of him in the bed.
Yeah.
I guess the echo of that sort of fake world created with someone getting in a car and there's Kylie. There's someone else in the car. And it always felt strange, but interesting. Yeah. I watched the most real concert, and then I'm watching this someone in the bedroom as someone wakes up.
Yeah, we were trying to push the idea of what a documentary could be at the time. So there are bits of it that are completely real. His reaction when he goes in to the store room, completely real. That happens. Like, we were there to capture it. Stuff like waking up, we wanted a cinematic way into the story. We wrote that there would be an answer phone message and that, so it's at the time we were pushing to kind of, and if we'd made the original film, we would have been able to kind of talk about that more. But I think because the film transformed because of circumstances, it kind of like it altered into different a different iteration of what it started as. Yeah.
I don't know. I read it as an interesting angle because maybe because of the kind of the professional deformation, you sort of, this is very confusing space. This is very confusing space and time, because even walking the dog, the way it's shot, is interesting.
You don't just happen to catch that stuff, you know.
We've
got a top shot of him walking along the road with the dog that was planned to cut to a top shot on the stage. You know, there was you can't make a film like that without writing certain bits, but we kind of based it on the truth, you know. And like, you know, documentary is never going to be the whole truth, but you're kind of, we wanted to get inside James's head and like what it meant to make that decision. So those bits in between the concert, which is kind of wild and like very raw in the way it's shot, were meant to be those sort of pauses for thought. There's a kind of a meditation on what it means to be walking away from something when it's just hitting its stride, kind of thing. So, you know, I think it accesses the truth, but it's not always truthful.
Well, it's something like that idea, the top-down walking dog shot. For those who haven't seen the film, it's a top-down shot of James Murphy walking a dog, and it cuts to him walking top-down on stage and getting into the song. What came first? That just an idea? You knew that's how you're going to shoot it? Or you sort of shot part and then like, oh, wow, you can shoot extras parts to actually glue it now?
Yeah, I mean, I think the idea came first. I think it was very deliberate. Like, we knew that we were going to have this kind of, you know, top shot. Yeah, we wanted a shot in the gig that had an artificiality that wasn't, you know, instead of the sweeping like crane shot where you don't feel like you're there at all, just the view, God's eye view, looking straight down at the stage and the crowd.
Because there was a lot, right? There was a lot of cameras, I think you told me.
Yeah, well, I remember at the time we had to fly them all in because Alexas had just, they'd only recently come out. So I think we had to fly in 14 Alexas or something.
Cool. Should we get Will? I saw Will in the comments.
Yeah, bring him in.
I like
suggesting ways to make it more entertaining for the people at home.
I think they shouldn't be entertained though. That's fucking every other live is just entertainment. This is slow Instagram. It's a very mellow Q&A. It's sort of just...
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty low energy, isn't it?
It's great. I think it's great. I think it's fucking great. Do you like directing non-actors? Because correct me if I'm wrong, your education film is actual teacher, I think, right?
Morning, you right? Nice trim, mate. Very good. Sit down. 10B, here's what's happening today. So, what's in the periodic table?
Elements.
Elements, right, good. Can everybody give me an example of an element? Nice one, lifesaver. Cheers, mate. Well, that's the kind of thing that we're looking at doing.
I just don't get it.
Okay, pens down. Let's try this a different way. Move your shoulders, more energy, and you're getting further apart into a liquid. Very good. Stop. Good. Look instantly what was happening. Ollie, what's going on, mate? What's it all? Whoa. Okay. If you need anything, come see me. Okay, break time's over.
Is it all time now?
So, you're 11. 4 weeks until your exams. And I want you to do as well as I know you can. It stops right now. So what does that mean?
I don't know, sir.
You put down what you think.
I've got a full unit, meters per second.
That's brilliant. I would not have thought about doing it that way. Well done. Have you done your homework? Do you have any other questions? Come on, you've got your hand up. Hey, listen. Come on, lads. Does that change whether you're for or against?
Yeah.
So what makes this good? Come on, look a bit closer. You can't see the gases because they're sort of pushing at the lid.
Oh, Jesus.
More energy. Really good, buddy, that. We'll be teaching everybody else soon. Okay, is that any better?
Yeah. Nice one, sir. See you tomorrow.
See you tomorrow.
Teaching. Every lesson shapes a life. Search Get Into Teaching.
Yeah, in both of those, they're all like real people. The teachers are real teachers. That was actually sort of part of the brief. That had to
What's
be real.
that like? Because obviously they're afraid of camera. Do you have to like brief them longer?
Well, on the teachers thing, it was brilliant. I mean, those guys, like, teachers make really good actors, you know. And actually, I think on both those adverts, it would have been really hard. We thought it beforehand, but it would have been really hard to have made with actors playing teachers, because the kind of nuance and detail that you kind of like that teachers have, it would have been really hard to get someone to sort of pretend to do that. And I think it makes it far more real because of that, you know, obviously. But yeah, it's great. I mean, like when we're making ads, we often like all try and cast non-actors, you know, not always, but like a mixture, or because, you know, they're kind of, if you can get a performance out of someone who isn't an actor, then it's always more real, isn't it? You know. Yeah, and it's exciting, isn't it, if you find like someone who's never done it before and they're suddenly brilliant, you know.
I'm reading the comments like come up randomly.
Me too. I was getting distracted.
It's a really tricky conversation. Yeah, when you have conversation and these comments, as you read them as well, it's like 4 people who talking 2 things simultaneously about the projects that have to be or had been abandoned. How does that happen? Have you had stories like that, and how often does that happen?
Yeah, I suppose in docs we've had a few ideas that we sort of tried to make happen, and for whatever reason they never did because of money or whatever. We started making a film with Bjork about the same sort of time we were making
Bjork and
Hits,
right?
And yeah, well, when we started making it off, it was a film about Bjork, her biophilia album, and the kind of she made an album based in the natural world, and it was a kind of natural history / music film, and we got David Attenborough involved to kind of, you know, because we thought that was really interesting, and then it ended up getting commissioned by Channel 4 as a TV show, and so we sort of ended up stepping off that, and someone else ended up making the thing that's on the TV show version of it. Yeah, there's lots of other things I suppose that we started and kind of at reasons outside of our control like never happened, which is very frustrating because, you know, unlike a commercial, which is usually it happens and quickly and it's, you know, and it's finished quickly, you spend like months, years thinking about stuff, talking about stuff, you know, thinking it's going to happen, and sometimes it doesn't.
Well, we lost Will. Oh, you're back. Because I was watching the Blur, No Distance Left to Run. You were listed in the credits as sound as well. So it's like a very core doco style crew.
Yeah, I mean, when we made, like Dylan said earlier, that it was like a film of 2 halves in terms of how we shot it. And it was like, for the first half of it, like Dylan shot it and I recorded the sound. It was literally just the 2 of us in a room with the band. And then that, you know, our friend Ross came on and shot like some of the stuff with us as well as the DP, but like, you know, Dylan shot the vast majority of that film and I did all the sound, you know. That's that, and actually that was how we wanted to do it.
You mentioned that you write your own treatments and you enjoy doing it to some extent. What's your approach with treatments? Do you sort of split the roles as well?
Yeah, I mean, I guess we mix it up, but we always like to find as much of the imagery ourselves as we can, you know, write it, you know, like one or other. Dylan often writes lots of them, but we always feel like if you go off and get someone else to write it, which we don't do, or you get someone else to find all your images, what do you sort, you know, like you're figuring out the idea as you're writing it, and you're figuring out what it looks like as you're searching for images. So I think like the more you can do of that yourself, the more that's your film, and you must see it when you get sent a treatment, you know, for a commercial, like that suddenly becomes the thing you're making. And if you've got to like have like full input into that, you know, you've got to do that yourself, because then suddenly everyone thinks they're making that thing, you know. And like I think it's super important to do that for sure.
And I think you can feel when someone wrote their own and haven't really, like, there is language.
It just seems so weird. It's like, yeah, I don't know.
That's the first, where you have control and you're giving it away already. References, Dylan. I find them always kind of niche is a cliche word, I guess, but they're from a certain era. They're kind of 80s, 70s, and before. Like, it's rare that you mention a film or director working now or in the last 20 years. Where did that kind of history of watching films came from? How was it, like a film school or?
No, weirdly, when Will and I were kids, for about half a year, we lived not so far from each other, but we didn't know each other. And we both used to go to the same Saturday morning kids cinema club, where they'd show things like Supergirl or Herbie or, you know, things of that nature. But no, I've always just been into kids. Jesus Christ.
Bye.
Freudian slip. I've always been into movies. We were kids watching movies, and you know what I mean. I don't mind kids. All right, not that way.
Watching kids watching movies. But then the more obscure doco references. Did that come from just growing up and being in sort of like an arts crowd? Because correct me if I'm wrong, you don't seem like a person who came from like an art school background watching this obscure stuff.
I think it's a gradual thing. I think it's, but also, like, you know, my friends growing up were into like all kinds of different films. At that time, he used to have stuff like Videodrome on Channel 4, where Alex Cox would present a really, you know, out there film, and Channel 4 used to show like some of the maddest stuff that just doesn't get put on TV today, or, you know, you have to find it on a niche streaming service or whatever. But, you know, back when there were 4 channels and, you know, film people programmed more inventively, you'd have some like incredibly interesting films. And then I also always just had like a desire to kind of find things that are more interesting that perhaps other people aren't watching. You know, I think in documentary terms, the ones that I mentioned aren't that niche, but they're perhaps, like you say, from a particular time, you know, from the 60s. You know, the Maysles brothers are a big thing. I like watch Grey Gardens and Salesman and things like that, and just liked the way that the stories are told, because it seems, whilst it is heavily mediated, there's nobody giving an interview, there's no voiceover, there's nobody telling you the story. So in a way, it's the closest documentary gets to cinema, because everything's just presented as moments, as scenes. And, you know, I want to watch stuff that makes me kind of feel something. I don't want to be passive and told the story of a band or the story of, you know, a very typical documentary way. I'd rather kind of be immersed and watch people.
Do you think that demand for that sort of cinema or advertising to some extent, is it disappearing, or is it just not in the mainstream, hence we sort of don't really know about it that much in the mainstream, I mean?
Yeah, I don't know, you tell me.
I think there is a certain trend, even in sports commercials, you know, like you can't really do even the most iconic sort of Nike stuff, like just the top white and the basketball players, and just based on the sound design. I don't think that would go past in a meeting with the agency. No. It has to be over-edited, over-animated on top of it, fucking cuts and I think that comes, then it does leak into the cinema, that the cinema is sped up and the characters are not thought that through. It's just meant to flash and give certain amount of dopamine, so it's just not, doesn't go past certain fucking filter and just doesn't ever get into cinema. So I don't know, I'm intrigued too.
Yeah. Well, I think in documentary there's a certain, the Netflixification of documentary has kind of happened, which means that you have, if it's true crime, then it's going to follow a certain format. If it's, a sports documentary, everything's got slicker and more formatted. And I think there is room for those kind of more interesting, rawer less polished but truer documentaries, I would say. Cinema, yeah, it's kind of having sort of been in the process of trying to get films made. You know, it's a budget thing. It's either hundreds of millions to make Avengers and something that's going to be on every cereal packet, or it's smaller and smaller budgets at the other end. So you just can't make the films that people used to make that are more interesting. You know, I like watching films that I don't understand or that don't have one explanation. So I watched Three Women a couple of weeks ago, the Robert Altman film, and just the fact that he dreamt that film and he didn't have an idea. He knew who he wanted to be in it. He knew roughly what it was about. He was able to go to the studio and get as much money as he needed to make it. And then most of the film is improvised and it feels like a dream. That just wouldn't happen now. You know, I don't think there's a director working today who'd be able to kind of make a film on those terms. And that's quite sad because it means it's not. Yeah, it means it's, I mean, obviously that was Robert Altman, like.
And probably, yeah, not his debut, obviously. But
I was about to say, you know, you wouldn't want to watch Michael Bay's dreamt film, but I actually quite would like to watch that.
I'm intrigued, yeah, because I feel it leaked into the commercial world where even the way it sort of starts to look and obviously edited, it's very hard to separate the voices. Like, it's very hard to.
Yeah. I mean, it goes in cycles, and I think, you know, a certain style of advert becomes popular, and then I think creatives write that type of advert, and then, you know, or a director's style is very big, and, you know, that's what everybody wants. And
did you feel that in your, say, 13-year commercial career, that you were up and down because?
Yeah, I mean, our commercial career hasn't been 13 years.
10, fuck, you know.
No. Yeah. No.
I was told 10. Guys, you have to decide. I can't alter the numbers throughout.
Do you know why I'm wearing a hat?
No.
I cut my own hair and I look like Kim Jong-un.
Did you feel you were sort of in demand, not in demand? In demand, not in demand?
Yeah. Oh, I mean, we've been very, very lucky in that we've always worked, but there's definitely been times when the type of work that we were getting just didn't feel kind of very fulfilling, you know. I think, but then that was like, we thought we were going to make a film, so we took work that perhaps didn't progress us in the direction we wanted to, because we thought, oh, well, we need to make some money, both got kids, do all these jobs, and then we'll be off for a year making our film. And of course, you're only really good as as good as your last couple of jobs, you know. And if you kind of dashed out a bunch of stuff, you know, and we never, I say that flippantly, but we always like put the effort in and try and make it as good as it can be. But, you know, and unfortunately, we're not in a position just to like hold out for, you know, there's two of us as a duo, like we have to kind of do twice the amount of jobs to, you know, pay our mortgages and buy our kids fish fingers. Yeah, you were asking if there were times when we were less in demand. I think less in demand for the type of work we wanted to be doing. But fortunately, we've always, you know, managed to keep working.
What are you prepping these days? Can you talk about anything you are planning to do now?
We're on another music documentary at the moment, which is based on the book Meet Me in the Bathroom, which is about the music scene in New York at the turn of the millennium. And it's, our kind of take on it is as much about the kind of huge change in culture from 20 years ago to now as it is about the music scene. And it's also kind of about the power of space to kind of the idea, the sort of mythology of New York as a creative space, and like, you know, what draws people there and how kind of the cycle of that. But then also in the intervening years, the idea of a music scene springing up as organically as that did and then permeating out to the rest of the world probably won't happen again, because the music industry is different, the internet, the way people consume stuff is different. Yeah. So first, as a TV series, we pitched it to all the big players which is a weird process. And people liked it.
Why weird?
There's a set way of doing it. You have to go in and there's a set way to pitch. And as you can tell from this, it's difficult to tell when me and Will are enthusiastic about things. And being enthusiastic is a necessary component of pitching an idea, especially in America. So it's but anyway, long story short, it was really liked as a TV series, but there wasn't necessarily the budget to do it as a TV series, because unlike Dr. Dre documentary that was on,
not Untouchables, I know what you mean.
That's a bigger audience, so they could spend $1 million an episode.
Plus, it's a fucking Apple commercial, no?
Yeah, exactly, on a doc like that. Whereas ostensibly, the bands featured in this book could be seen as more niche. So, like the idea of it being a 4-hour series slowly changed into being a feature doc, which is obviously where we've done work before. But this one's going to be different again. Like the reason we haven't done a documentary for ages is, well, one, we had a bunch that fell through. Two, we didn't want to make another music doc, and that would have been the easiest thing for us to do.
That fear of being pigeonholed, does it come from this fear that then you'll do just that for life, just music docs for life? If you just enjoy, you love the book, why not to filter that out? Be like, yeah, whatever, I'll do another music doc.
Well, that's what it was on this. It was kind of like, oh yeah, this story is interesting. I think it just has to be more than a music doc.
Can I poke your brain a little bit? Where is the this is going great, guys. This is the thickness of the book.
Yeah.
What goes through your brain as directors when you prep, like when you start, just for those who haven't read it, that's the way it's written. So it's literally paragraphs, sometimes one funny sentence, and it's like stream of consciousness, but from like 70 people at the same time. What goes through your brain?
What's the story? What is of interest? And then if it's a 4-part series, then people consume it in a different way. You know, it has to become more episodic. So when it was a 4-part series, we looked at the catalysts and we'd say, you know, I think I was thinking about The Wire, how each series of The Wire has a different aspect.
Yeah, like newspaper,
Yeah, so you've got the docs and the unions, you've got the newspaper, you've got education. So I think the initial thing was, well, this is a sprawling story that takes in lots and lots of different characters. How can we make each episode different? So each one will have a catalyst. So the catalyst for the opening episode was going to be 9/11, because like that's what was happening in the city at that time, and in some way inflected the spirit of the artists who were kind of in these bands at the time. I think the next one was technology, because that was the catalyst that was going to change the music industry, change the world, and we had 4 catalysts. I think the fourth one was like gentrification, and it was a bit of a downer ending in that, like, kind of mutated.
Ironically, they were a massive part of it.
Yeah,
gentrification.
It mutates into you know, there's a sort of satellite Williamsburg in every major city in the world now. But then also, like, within that story, you have the bands who started it, and you have the ones that followed, who are, you know, there was a strokes in every country, like the Swedish strokes, you know, and it just all got kind of homogenized as is how capitalism works, and here we are.
And then for financial reasons, it's going to be a feature doc, or what's the reason to abandon?
Yeah.
Or the format just didn't work with you?
No, it was basically, it would be too expensive, because we were to kind of do as a series. Then also we kind of looked at the story we were really interested in, and also felt we were spreading it a bit thin over 4 episodes, and like just really going in. And again, it's not like we don't want to go and recreate what's in the book, because the book exists. We want to make a film that kind of uses that as a jumping off point.
Plus, it's going to be a pretty heavy YouTube like montage if it's going to be just visualized. The book, I mean, it's just because when I was reading it, I was like, because it's enjoyable, but it is heavy. It overwhelms you eventually, because
I
like,
mean,
who is talking, because you're just confused. And
I mean, we're reducing the contributors down to minimum, and we've reduced the time period covered to a much shorter amount of time.
With a doc like this, right? The doc about New York, noughties, 9/11. It's kind of interesting subject. It's still niche. Like even if the bands are relatively big, it's niche. Who are you making this film for? Who is the audience? Do you care who is the audience?
In a weird way, there's an audience that comes to it, you know, and for a documentary, that's a reasonable sized audience, you know, like the people who were in their late teens and 20s at the turn of the millennium, you know, the nostalgia is a big industry, so there's that audience. But then I think hopefully there's an audience outside of that. There's like younger people who missed it first time round, and kind of like, I think seeing the world before cell phones were like everywhere, and seeing the world before people really use the internet the way that they do today.
Yeah.
And that's another big thing, is we want to make it immersive, and we don't want that sort of talking heads looking back to, you know, a really kind of retrospective look at it. We want to kind of situate people in 1999, 2000, 2001. So hopefully there's an audience of curious people who find that aspects of it interesting. And yeah, I don't know. You know, I mean, do you make a film for an audience, or do you? I mean, you do, but like, you've got to make a story that.
I just wonder in this day and age of directing, you know, because I've never directed. I can't imagine doing the sort of creating the world from.
I thought you directed that stand-up, Russian stand-up.
Didn't really direct it. I mean, it's just looking after the visual side. But it's more, I'm intrigued whether in this day and age, because I like this point about the time, that it's time not just without headphones, without the cell phones and internet, because that's anything past, I don't know, basically 1999, but it's just before the internet. So it's sort of, we remember it as a kid, and someone doesn't remember because they never lived, but they're like, fuck, if I was born like 3 years before, I would have caught it. And I think that's the beauty of it. You can sort of easily relate to this idea, but I wonder whether people are becoming less curious, you know, because most interesting docs, I kind of learned it that way, in a way, that I struggle to even find some of the docs that are referenced sometimes. I have to dig into some weird Chinese/Russian torrents to actually dig it up in a decent quality, that there is a demand for a mass market. It is, but between watching it and not watching it at all, I choose illegal. But it seems that it's sad that you have to go illegal to watch interesting stuff, and it's more and more. There's whole layers disappearing into illegal because there's no distribution. No one picks up a film that's not going to sell. There is no question. It's just sadness of curiosity. I think that's it. I think that's the.
What about the hundreds of questions that you got sent in when you asked for them?
I had a very well. There was 1,600 bots. There's no questions anymore. They just disappeared. Gents, thank you for digging, staying around.
Is that it? James has only just joined though.
I love the dynamic of these sort of lives.
Our friend Neil's there as well. Can you say hello to Neil in LA?
Do I do shout outs now? Neil in LA. Are we seeing different feeds? I don't see Neil.
Quick
Best
question.
film based on a book.
Best film based on a book. What do you think, Edgar? What would you say? Best haircut, Kim Jong-un.
One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. I would say is probably one. Favorite. Lager. Sorry, I read Tiger. I have a question actually, Dylan. I didn't ask. It was actually in your folder. Would you say you have?
I've got my own folder.
Yeah, it's like I say folder. It's just a file separated in two, just so I can. Why you keep showing your?
James Sorton is asking me to take my hat off so you can see the terrible haircut I gave myself. Someone's flipping it and saying best book based off a film, and I would say that is the novelization of Maverick, the Mel Gibson film. Do you listen to music that isn't part of the sequence you are working on when you edit? Yes.
So line up so you have hair above your hat.
Oh yeah, that's favorite actor. 3 advices that you would give to directors in their starting years. I'm not very good at advice, like, because we didn't really have. What would I have done differently? I guess just make more stuff. That's a cliche piece of advice, isn't it? Like make more stuff.
Is it that easy to just make stuff? I know people advise that, but I'm always.
It depends.
Well, just take a camera and start filming.
Level of quality. James says, stop answering actual questions and just answer questions about soap operas and Will's hair. Oh, is this an extension of that question that I failed to answer?
I guess. I think it's the same lady.
If you know any certain mistakes directors tend to make at the start, what are they? I'm not very good at serious questions.
We've done 2 hours of this, though.
It's also quite late for me. Starting quick.
But also, I think the industry has massively changed, no? Like,
yeah, I mean, it has changed since we started, but I mean, I would say make work that represents you, and then I think send it to the production company that you'd like to represent you, and try and build relationships there.
Be yourself.
Be yourself. I mean, Will and I just lucked out, so there was never any plan, so it's hard to give advice based on that.
It's hard to give advice, full stop. When you cast, like talking about acting, do you do some sort of tricks? Like, how do you, what's your advice in good casting? Or do you just go by character?
Anyone who comes in acting, we generally don't want to work with. Like, if you can feel them acting. So it's like, first of all, it's like just who feels like a interesting person. It's how small they can go. Like, you know, we always push back, and just try and get something that doesn't feel like acting, I guess. Will once gave the direction "act better." It's one of my favourite pieces of direction ever.
Did it work?
Oh, then we have to clap the NHS.
In 2 minutes, though.
Yeah, okay. Was there ever a time when you felt lazy, not in the mood to think of projects, or were you always constantly on a drive to create stroke work?
Well, I mean, look at the drive in this.
But yeah, I mean, sometimes it's not happening. Like, I was writing a script, which I wrote the first draft of in 5 weeks, and then when I got notes back, it took me a year to write the second draft, and that was full of like moments when I was like, I can't do this. But I'm such a naturally positive person that I just pushed on and got it done.
Do you have quite a dark mind, Dylan?
No. Neil, yes, he did. Ross, we went to watch.
We did answer that 6 hours.
Yeah, we talked about that earlier. Oh, have we finished?
I guess so.
God, there's still people watching nothing.
It's not nothing, it's slow.